Now, I know a lot of us have been on apps such as Redfin, Zillow, and we may have just been scrolling, right? Or looking at little apartments, houses, and thinking, oh, how nice. But have you noticed just how high the cost is to live in these spaces lately? I mean, they're going for like 1,500 at minimum for the one bedroom, tiny space, like 500 square feet. And it's almost like, how can one afford that, especially in this economy? And most of us think that that's what the housing crisis is solely about, just high prices. But imagine working your entire life to afford a home. You do everything right. You save your money, and still you're being told that you can't live somewhere. And it's not because you can't afford it, but because of your race. And this isn't something that is just historical. It's actually something that people have to deal with today, in present time. And today I'm going to talk about the causes, the effects, and solutions to the housing crisis. And as someone who lives in an area just off of City Avenue and who has studied the housing patterns in Philadelphia, this isn't something that I'm just newly learning about. It's also something that I experienced firsthand and that I continue to see on a daily basis. And I'm going to explain just how discriminatory housing practices such as redlining has created the housing crisis and how those effects are still visible today. And I am also going to talk about what we can do to fix it. So first, I want us to talk about the cause. The housing crisis didn't just happen randomly. It was built through policies that were intentionally discriminatory. One major example is redlining, where banks refused to give loans to black families, and they labeled their neighborhoods as risky. This made it extremely difficult for black families to buy homes and build wealth. But unfortunately, it didn't just stop there. According to the Philadelphia Inquirer, there was an article about the history of the Main Line, where some housing deeds literally stated that homes could only be sold to the Caucasian race. This means that it wasn't just bias, it was actually legal to have this practice. The article also followed the story of the Jenkins family. This was a black family who lived near those neighborhoods but were still excluded from buying homes in certain areas. The Jenkins family story shows how black families could live near opportunities. They could work in those communities and, in fact, go to school in these areas, but still be locked out of fully participating in them. And at one point, there was even a 200 lot development that was completely restricted to white families. And one line from the article really stuck with me. It said, "It's like they open the door and show you the other side, but they won't let you go in." And that right there explains how the housing crisis started. It was exclusion on purpose. Now I want us to talk about the effects, because this didn't just stay in the past. When I did my sociology project, I focused on a specific area. What I found was honestly extremely shocking to me. I looked on the census data, I looked on a map, and the population there was mostly black, and with about 4,800 black residents compared to approximately 200 white residents and 28 non-Hispanic Asian residents. And what really stood out to me was how quickly things changed when you crossed over City Avenue. The population density dropped by a lot, and the racial makeup looked completely different. And that showed me how sharply divided the neighborhoods are, even when they're right next to each other. And I've seen this in real life too. Living near this area, I can literally see how neighborhoods shift just by going a few blocks. One area has row homes, more density, and more black residents. But when you cross over and suddenly have those bigger homes and more space and different demographics. And this isn't random, this is literally very purposeful, very intentional. And according to the Pew Research Center, black home ownership rates are still significantly lower than white home ownerships today. That means the effects on those past policies are still here. Even in the article, you can see the long-term impact. You have a home owned by a black family that sold for about $210,000, while nearby homes were selling for about $100,000 more. So even when black families were able to buy homes, those homes were still worth a lot less. That creates a cycle, and less home value means less wealth, which ultimately means fewer opportunities over time. So now the question is, what can we do about it? If these problems were created by policies, then they can be fixed by policies too. So according to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, increasing access to affordable housing and enforcing fair housing laws are some of the most important steps. This means that making sure people are not being discriminated against when trying to buy or rent homes. We also need to invest in communities that were historically overlooked. That includes better schools, better housing opportunities, and more resources all across the board. And honestly, awareness is a huge part. It plays a huge part in the solution. Before this class, I didn't fully understand why neighborhoods looked the way they did. But now I realize that these patterns were created intentionally and they continue to affect people today. So to wrap everything up, the housing crisis was not an accident. It was caused by discriminatory policies like redlining and racial housing segregation. Racial housing restrictions, excuse me. The effects are still visible today through segregation, wealth gaps, and unequal opportunities. And the solutions require intentional action, policy changes, and awareness. The line that divides our neighborhoods were drawn a long time ago, but we are the generation that can decide whether they stay or not.